Salif Ouedraogo had always been different from the other kids in his neighborhood. While others played soccer on the dusty streets of Ouagadougou, Salif would lie on his back and watch airplanes fly high above. He would follow their trail across the sky until they disappeared behind the clouds. He didn't know where they came from or where they were going. All he knew was that he wanted to be up there with them one day. Not just as a passenger, but as the person who built the plane. Salif's love for machines started early. At the age of 7, he fixed his first broken radio, using only a spoon and a screwdriver. His mother, a school cleaner, came home one day to find their old radio playing again. She was shocked because they had no money to take it to a repair shop. When she asked who fixed it, Salif just smiled and said, "I figured it out." From that day on, Salif became known as the neighborhood repair boy. People brought him old fans, broken bicycles, even dusty sewing machines. He never asked for money, he just wanted to learn. His small hands moved fast and his mind moved even faster. Every piece he opened, he studied. Every screw and wire had a purpose, and he was determined to understand it all. But while Salif enjoyed fixing things, his dream was much bigger. He didn't want to spend his whole life repairing machines. He wanted to create something new, something no one in Burkina Faso had ever done before. He wanted to build an airplane. Most people laughed when he told them. "You want to build a what?" they'd ask, raising their eyebrows. "Boy, airplanes are for rich countries. Go fix your bicycle." Salif didn't mind. He had heard such words before. Still, he knew he couldn't do it alone. That's when he turned to his best friend, Issa Kabore. Issa was the only person who didn't think Salif's dream was foolish. Tall and quiet, Issa loved to draw. His notebooks were full of sketches, cars, rockets, and of course planes. The two boys had grown up together, often sitting under a mango tree dreaming about the future. When Salif told Issa his plan to build a real airplane, Issa didn't laugh. Instead, he opened his sketchbook and said, "Let's draw it." Together, they began to imagine the aircraft. They started with paper and pencils, designing wings, engines, and tail sections. They didn't have fancy tools or software, but they had ideas. They visited internet cafes, watching videos of aircraft design and reading articles, even though the slow connection made everything take hours. Every coin they earned from repairs went into their project. They bought old bicycle frames, used metal sheets, wires, and broken engine parts from the local scrapyard. Their neighbors watched with curiosity as the two boys dragged strange-looking objects into Salif's backyard. At first, people thought they were building a big cart. Others thought it was a joke, but the boys knew exactly what they were doing. They turned an old shed behind Salif's house into their workshop. It was small, dark, and hot, but it became their favorite place. Using a hand drill, hammer, and welding torch borrowed from a local mechanic, they started shaping the body of the plane. Their hands got burned, they made mistakes, and sometimes parts broke after days of hard work. But they never gave up. Their biggest supporter was Salif's mother. She didn't always understand what they were doing, but she saw the light in her son's eyes. Every night she brought them water and food as they worked late into the evening. She would sit nearby, watching quietly as sparks flew from the welding torch and the boys argued about wing angles and balance. One day, after many weeks of work, they finally managed to put together a rough frame of the plane. It wasn't pretty. The wings were uneven and the body still had gaps. But to them it was beautiful. It was real. It was the beginning of something they had only seen in books and on screens. Still, the road ahead was long. They didn't have an engine strong enough to lift the plane. They didn't fully understand how to calculate lift or weight balance. They needed help, but they didn't know where to find it. They began asking around, looking for anyone who knew anything about airplanes. That's when a miracle happened. One afternoon, as Salif and Issa were working in the backyard, a man stopped at the gate. He was older, with gray hair and a calm face. He introduced himself as Captain Nikiema. He had heard about two boys trying to build a flying machine from someone at the mechanic shop. Curious, he came to see it for himself. When he stepped into the shed and saw the work the boys had done, His eyes lit up. "You're serious," he said softly. "You're really trying to build a plane?" Salif nodded. "We want to make Burkina Faso's first homemade airplane." Captain Nikiema had been a pilot for over 30 years. He had flown for the Air Force and for private companies. Now retired, he missed the sky. Seeing the boy's dedication reminded him of his own youth. He smiled and said, "I'll help you." From that day on, the project changed. With Captain Nikiema's guidance, Salif and Issa learned how wings must be shaped to create lift. They learned about balance, control surfaces, and fuel efficiency. He showed them how to read blueprints and introduced them to old flight manuals. The boys soaked up the knowledge like dry soil in rain. The community, which once laughed at them, began to take notice. Some neighbors even offered help. A carpenter offered wood for the propeller. A welder helped them with joints. And a shopkeeper donated paint for the plane's body. What started as a dream between two boys was slowly becoming a project for the whole neighborhood. At night under the stars, Salif and Issa would sit on the roof of the shed looking up at the sky. "One day," Salif whispered, "we'll be up there, and we'll know we built it ourselves." Issa nodded, "And we'll show the world that it can be done, even from here." Their journey was just beginning, but the most important step had already been taken. They had dared to believe in something bigger than themselves. And now their dream was no longer just a thought. It was taking shape, piece by piece, in a small backyard in Burkina Faso. The sun had just risen over Ouagadougou when Salif and Issa opened the shed door and stepped inside their tiny workshop. It had now become a second home to them, a place filled with tools, wires, engine parts, and drawings pinned to every wall. The unfinished airplane stood at the center, its shiny metal frame catching the morning light. It still couldn't fly, but to Salif and Issa, it already had wings of hope. The arrival of Captain Nikiema had changed everything. His knowledge, experience, and gentle guidance were exactly what the two young builders needed. He didn't try to take over their dream. Instead, he worked beside them, showing them what they were missing and encouraging them when things got tough. Every afternoon, after resting from his morning walks, Captain Nikiema would come to the shed with a small notebook and a pencil behind his ear. He brought diagrams and old manuals from his flying days. He explained lift, drag, thrust, and how every part of the airplane needed to work together like a team. Salif listened carefully, writing notes in the back of a school notebook. Issa kept improving their drawings, adding more accurate measurements, and sketching new ideas based on what they were learning. Even with all the new information, building an airplane from mostly recycled materials was never easy. Their engine was still not strong enough. The wings had to be lighter, and the landing wheels, they needed something better than the old cart tires they had been using. One weekend, Salif and Issa visited the city junkyard again. It had become one of their favorite places, even though it smelled of old oil and rust. They walked between piles of metal, searching for anything that could help their project. After hours of digging and bargaining, they left with a few more pipes, a broken scooter engine, and an old fuel tank. Back at the workshop, they got to work. Issa cleaned the engine while Salif tested the weight of different metals for the wing support. Captain Nikiema helped them understand which parts were too heavy and which ones could be reused. Every single bolt was checked. Every wire was tested, twice. But sometimes things went wrong. One day, after a full week of work, the boys tried to attach the wing supports to the body. They used the wrong screws, and the entire side collapsed. They sat on the floor in silence. For a moment, it felt like everything was falling apart. Captain Nikiema found them like that and didn't scold them. He simply said, "Mistakes are part of flying. The best pilots learn from the ground up." With that, they stood up and started again. Stronger screws, better measurements, more patience. News of their project had begun to spread through the community. At first, it was just whispers. "Did you hear about those boys building a plane?" Then one day, a teacher from the nearby technical school came to see it for himself. Impressed by their work, he invited them to visit the school's lab. There, Salif and Issa saw tools they had only dreamed of, 3D models, measuring devices, even a small wind tunnel. Though they could only visit a few times, they used every minute to learn something new. A few university students started dropping by their workshop, curious and excited. Some even offered help with difficult calculations. The neighborhood that once doubted them was beginning to change. More people stopped by, not to laugh but to ask questions. Children pressed their faces to the fence, trying to catch a glimpse of the metal bird taking shape. One man who owned a welding shop nearby offered to weld the landing gear for free. Another man who fixed cars brought over a newer battery. A woman from the market brought them cold drinks every afternoon. Slowly, this was no longer just Salif and Issa's dream. It had become a shared hope. The plane now had a name, Faso Flyer 1. Issa had painted it carefully in blue letters on the side of the aircraft. They chose the name because it honored their country, Burkina Faso, and their belief that anything was possible here, even the sky. They worked on the wings next. Captain Nikiema explained how the shape mattered more than size. Using light but strong wood, they built the frame, then covered it with tightly stretched fabric coated in a special glue to make it stronger. They tested it by standing on it, tapping it, even shaking it. If it could handle their weight, it could handle the wind. Then came the control system. This was the hardest part. They didn't have access to real airplane controls, so they had to be creative. Using bicycle chains, metal rods, and pulleys, they built a simple system that moved the rudder and the ailerons when Salif pulled on a handle inside the cockpit. They spent days testing it. Pull right, the wing moved. Pull left, it moved again. Salif sat inside the cockpit, eyes full of wonder, as Issa shouted directions and checked responses. The engine was their final challenge. The small scooter engine they had found could spin. The propeller, but only at low speed. Captain Nikiema taught them how to modify it, adding extra air intake and cleaning the fuel lines. After many hours of trial, the engine finally started with a steady hum. The sound brought the entire neighborhood to the fence. People clapped, children danced, and Salif's mother wiped tears from her eyes. It was the first time the plane made a real sound. The dream had become something you could hear. They mounted the propeller, a wooden piece shaped by a local carpenter, and gave it a test spin. It wasn't perfect, but it worked. Every time they tested the engine, it made a little more sense. They kept notes, made changes, and slowly improved it. Captain Nikiema began talking to some of his old friends. He contacted a small rural airstrip just outside the city and asked if the boys could bring their project there when it was ready. The manager agreed, curious about what these young minds were building. One evening, as the sun set behind the dusty hills, Salif looked at the nearly finished plane and whispered, "We're almost there." Issa nodded. "We just need one good test, one chance." They weren't experts, they didn't have a big budget, but what they had was even stronger, a belief that they could do something amazing with what little they had. Their plane was not just metal and wood. It was made of dreams, sweat, teamwork, and the kindness of those who believed in them. The Faso Flyer 1 stood quietly in the shed, waiting for its turn to rise. Word about Salif and Issa's airplane project was spreading faster than they ever imagined. It started with curious neighbors and friends, then reached teachers, students, and even local shopkeepers. But soon, the story of two young boys building an airplane in their backyard reached beyond their neighborhood. One day, a local journalist named Awa Traore stopped by. She had heard whispers about a plane made by two boys with no factory, no rich sponsors, just heart and tools. She walked into the dusty shed with her camera, notebook, and wide eyes. She watched quietly as Salif and Issa worked on connecting the fuel lines, while Captain Nikiema explained the process in calm, careful words. After spending a full day with them, Awa wrote a story for the city newspaper. The headline was simple but powerful. Two dreamers aim for the sky. Under the title was a photo of Salif and Issa standing proudly beside the Faso Flyer 1, with grease on their hands and hope in their eyes. The story became popular. More people began visiting the shed. Some came to offer help, some just to watch, and many came to take photos with the young inventors. But the biggest surprise came a week later when Salif received a phone call from the Ministry of Innovation and Scientific Research. A soft voice on the phone said, "We read your story, and we'd like to meet you." Salif was shocked. He had never spoken to any government official before. Captain Nikiema smiled and encouraged him. "This is your moment. Speak from your heart." Salif and Issa put on clean shirts and traveled to the ministry building the next day. It was a large white structure with air conditioning and big glass windows, so different from their small shed. Inside, they were greeted kindly and brought to a meeting room. There they met engineers, researchers, and even the minister herself. The minister was impressed. She said, "We are proud of what you're doing. You have reminded us all that invention doesn't always need big factories. It starts with big dreams." Although the ministry couldn't give them a large budget, they offered tools, safety equipment, and free access to an engineering lab once a week. They also connected them with university students who were studying aeronautics. Suddenly, Salif and Issa were no longer working alone. They had a team. The students helped them test wing angles, engine heat limits, and flight balance. They explained math formulas that helped the boys improve their designs. Some students even came to the shed on weekends to help with testing. Every change made the Faso Flyer 1 stronger. The wings were reinforced. The engine was better balanced. The control cables were adjusted for smoother movement. The plane, once a shaky frame of hope, was now becoming a real flying machine. One evening, as they prepared for another test, a teacher from the National University visited. He walked around the plane, asked a few technical questions, and finally said, "I think it's ready for a ground test." That single sentence filled the shed with energy. A ground test meant the plane would move on a runway under its own power. It wouldn't fly yet, but it would be a major step forward. They chose a wide, flat field on the edge of the city, where dry grass had been cleared for local soccer matches. It wasn't a real runway, but it was good enough. With the help of the ministry and university, they arranged permission to use it. On the morning of the test, Salif arrived early. He checked every bolt, every screw, every wire. Issa tightened the propeller. Captain Nikiema stood nearby with a calm expression, his hands behind his back. The crowd was small, just family, a few neighbors, and some students. But the excitement was strong. When Salif started the engine, the hum filled the field. Slowly, the Faso Flyer 1 began to move. It rolled over the grass, a little bumpy at first, but steady. Salif used the homemade control handles to steer. The plane responded. The crowd clapped and cheered. It didn't take off, but it didn't fall apart either. That short roll across the field felt like a great leap. The boys had proved that their creation was not just a dream. It worked. Photos from the ground test appeared on television, in newspapers, and on social media. People from other parts of the country began calling Salif and Issa. Messages came in from students in other African nations. Some wanted to visit. Others just wanted to say, "You inspired us." The ministry saw how the public had embraced the story. They decided to support a full demonstration flight. A date was set, and a real airstrip was chosen outside Ouagadougou. Government officials, journalists, engineers, and students were invited. The Faso Flyer 1 would fly, if all went well. As the big day approached, the team worked harder than ever. They repainted the plane. They tested the engine every evening. Salif practiced handling the controls from inside the cockpit, while Issa monitored all the systems. Every part of the plane had a name now. The wings were hope and strength. The engine was called Heartbeat. The propeller was named Belief. It wasn't just a machine. It was a message. On the night before the flight, Salif couldn't sleep. He sat on the shed roof with Issa, staring at the stars. "Do you think it will fly?" Issa asked quietly. Salif nodded. "Even if it doesn't, we already flew in people's hearts." Issa smiled. "But I want to see it in the sky." Salif whispered, "We all do." In a corner of the shed, Captain Nikiema prepared his notes. Though he wouldn't be flying the plane, he would be beside the runway, guiding every step. He had come out of retirement for these two boys, and now Watching their journey, he felt as proud as any pilot who had crossed the clouds. The Faso Flyer 1, once just pieces of metal and wood lying on a dusty floor, now stood ready for flight. It was no longer just a project. It had become a national symbol of what could be done with courage, teamwork, and endless belief. The day had finally come, the day when Faso Flyer 1 would try to leave the ground and rise into the sky. Everyone involved in the project had marked the date on their calendar. The airstrip just outside Ouagadougou had been cleared and prepared. Flags fluttered gently in the wind, and people were gathering with excited smiles, holding their phones and cameras, ready to witness something special. Salif and Issa woke up early. Neither of them had slept much the night before. Their hearts were racing with both joy and nervousness. They dressed in clean shirts, packed their toolkits, and carefully tied down the covers of the Faso Flyer 1, which had been transported on a small truck the night before. As they arrived at the airstrip, they were surprised by what they saw. Hundreds of people had come: students, teachers, community leaders, engineers, and families. Children sat on their parents' shoulders to get a better view. The crowd wasn't just from their neighborhood now. Some had come from other towns and cities. Everyone was talking about the same thing: the young inventors who built a plane with their own hands. Captain Nikiema was already there, standing near the airstrip with a clipboard and walkie-talkie. He gave them a warm smile as they approached. "Today is not just your flight," he said. "It's a flight for all of Burkina Faso." Salif took a deep breath and nodded. "We're ready." Faso Flyer 1 stood proudly on the edge of the runway. Its silver body gleamed in the sunlight, and the blue letters spelling its name looked bold and bright. The wings were steady, the propeller freshly oiled, and the cockpit clean and focused. Salif climbed in while Issa walked around, checking everything one last time. They had done this hundreds of times before, but this time felt different. Nearby, a group of university students monitored the weather, wind direction, and other flight details. The engine had been warmed up already. It gave off a smooth hum that filled the air with energy. The moment everyone had waited for was close. A government official stood before the crowd and raised a microphone. "Today," he said, "we are not just witnessing the first homemade airplane of Burkina Faso. We are witnessing what happens when courage, creativity, and community come together." Everyone applauded. Cameras flashed. Salif adjusted his seat and placed both hands on the controls. Captain Nikiema gave him a thumbs up from the side. The engine roared to life. Slowly, the Faso Flyer 1 began to roll forward. At first it moved, slowly down the runway. The crowd went silent, holding their breath. Salif focused hard, guiding the plane straight. The wheels picked up speed. The wind pushed against the wings. Then, all at once, it happened. The plane lifted, only a few feet, off the ground, then a little more. It wasn't a high flight, but the wheels were no longer touching the earth. For the first time, Faso Flyer 1 was flying. The crowd erupted in cheers. Some people clapped wildly. Others had tears in their eyes. Issa jumped into the air, laughing and pointing. "It's flying! It's really flying!" Salif stayed calm. He kept the plane steady for a few seconds before gently guiding it back down to the runway. The landing was soft and smooth. The plane rolled to a stop as the engine slowed. Then the air was filled with the loudest cheer anyone had ever heard on that airstrip. People ran toward the plane, but not too close. Everyone was smiling, clapping, and calling out Salif and Issa's names. Salif climbed out, his face glowing with pride. Captain Nikiema reached him first and gave him a strong handshake, then a hug. "You did it, son," he said. Reporters rushed forward to capture the moment. Microphones, cameras, and notebooks surrounded the two boys. One asked, "How did you feel up there?" Salif smiled and said, "It felt like all of Burkina Faso was flying with me." The story quickly spread across the country and beyond. News stations replayed the flight again and again. On social media, videos of the takeoff filled people's feeds. Everyone was talking about Faso Flyer 1, the homemade plane that actually flew, but it didn't stop there. The Ministry of Innovation invited the boys to speak at a national science event. At the event, Salif and Issa gave a short presentation, about how they built the plane, the challenges they faced, and the support they received from the community. Their story inspired students, teachers, and leaders alike. Later, a university offered them scholarships to study mechanical and aeronautical engineering. The boys who once struggled to find basic parts now had access to the best labs and tools. But they didn't forget where they started. Every weekend they still visited the shed where it all began, cleaning their old tools and talking about their next big idea. One day, as they sat under the mango tree outside the shed, Isa asked, "Do you think we can build something even bigger one day?" Salif laughed. "Why not? Maybe one day we'll build a plane that can carry passengers, or something that runs completely on solar power." Captain Nikima joined them and said, "Whatever you decide to build, remember this. Nothing flies without belief. You had that from the beginning." Months later, Faso Flyer 1 was placed in a special exhibition at the National Museum of Innovation. Children came on school trips to see the small silver plane that once flew above the red earth. There was a plaque that read, "Faso Flyer 1, the first homemade airplane of Burkina Faso built by Salif Ouattara and Issa Zongo, guided by Captain Ibrahim Nikiema. A dream that took flight on the wings of hope." Even years after the flight, the story continued to inspire others. New groups of students began working on their own inventions: solar-powered bikes, water-cleaning machines, even wind energy projects. And every time a new idea took shape, people would say, "If Salif and Issa could build a plane, we can do this too." The journey of Faso Flyer 1 was not just about flying. It was about showing the world that with hard work, imagination, and community support, even the biggest dreams could come true. And for Salif and Issa, the sky was no longer the limit. It was just the beginning. After the successful flight of Faso Flyer 1, everything changed for Salif and Issa. Their names were known across the country. Newspapers called them the Sky Brothers, and young students looked up to them as role models. But even with all the attention, Salif and Issa stayed humble. They were proud, but they didn't let success make them forget who they were. Every week, they still returned to the small shed where it all began. The tools were still there. The old drawings still hung on the walls. The floor still had oil, stains from the early days. They kept it just the way it was because to them that shed was more than just a workspace. It was their classroom, their lab, and their home of dreams. Now that they had become national heroes, people from other countries also wanted to meet them. A team of engineers from Ghana invited them to visit their university. In Senegal, a group of young inventors asked them to give a talk. Even a few people from Europe sent messages, saying they were impressed by what the two boys had done with such limited resources. One of the most touching moments came when an elderly man from a village in the north sent them a letter. It read, "I have lived for 73 years and never thought I'd see someone from our land build an airplane. You have made us proud. My grandchildren want to be like you." Salif read the letter twice and kept it in his notebook. It reminded him why they started this journey in the first place. At the same time, the government saw a new opportunity. If two boys with simple tools could build a plane, what could the entire country do with the right support? Soon, a national project was started. It was called the Youth Innovation Initiative, and its goal was to help young people across Burkina Faso create inventions in science, technology, and engineering. They built small labs in schools, provided basic kits to students, and invited people like Salif and Issa to guide them. Salif and Issa didn't just say yes, they jumped at the chance. They started traveling from city to city, village to village, sharing their story and teaching others. Sometimes they taught kids how to make paper planes or build small machines using wood and batteries. Other times, they simply listened to young students talk about their dreams. In one small village school, a girl named Mariam asked, "Can girls also build airplanes?" Salif smiled and said, "Absolutely. Airplanes don't care who builds them. They just need people who believe." That moment stayed with him. From then on, he always made sure to tell every student, boy or girl, that their ideas were important, that their hands were powerful, that their minds could shape the future. Meanwhile, Faso Flyer 1 remained in the National Museum, but the boys were already thinking ahead. "Let's build something better," Issa said one day. "Something that can fly higher and go farther," Salif agreed. "We've built one plane, now let's build a future." With support from their university and engineers from the ministry, they began designing Faso Flyer 2. This time they wanted to use new technology, lighter materials, more efficient fuel systems, and maybe even solar panels. They also wanted to make it easier for students to understand the process, so they recorded videos of every step and posted them online. Their videos became popular across West Africa. Students watched them in classrooms. Teachers used them in science lessons. Some even started their own mini-projects inspired by the Sky Brothers. But building Faso Flyer 2 wasn't easy. They faced new problems. Some parts were expensive. The new engine design needed extra testing, and sometimes the weather delayed their work. Still, they didn't give up. They worked late into the night. Sometimes they got tired. Sometimes they made mistakes. But every time, they reminded themselves why they started, to show what's possible when you never stop believing. One afternoon, while they were working on the new propeller system, Captain Nikiema visited them. He had become more than just a mentor now. He was like family. He sat quietly, watching them work, then said, "When I was your age, I only dreamed of flying. But you're building the future." Those words filled their hearts with pride. They knew they were no longer just boys with a dream. They had become leaders, teachers, and change-makers. Months passed, and Faso Flyer 2 neared completion. It looked more polished, more advanced, and more powerful than the first. This time, it had space for 2 seats. Salif and Issa decided that they would fly it together. The launch of Faso Flyer 2 was planned to be bigger than the first. The president of the country was invited. So were leaders from other African nations, engineers from international companies, and even students who had started their own projects after seeing Faso Flyer 1. The day of the launch arrived. The sun rose over the city, bright and warm. The airstrip was filled with colorful tents, smiling faces, and hopeful hearts. Music played in the background as children danced and waved small flags. Everyone was excited. Faso Flyer 2 stood tall and shining on the runway. It was more than just an airplane now, it was a message that dreams are worth chasing, a message that even small countries can do big things. Salif and Issa wore matching flight suits, gifted to them by the ministry. Before climbing into the cockpit, they looked at each other and smiled. "Ready?" Salif asked. "Always," Issa replied. As the engine started, the sound was deeper and stronger than the first. The plane moved forward smoothly. The wheels rolled faster, and then, gracefully, it lifted into the sky. This time they flew higher. They circled once above the crowd. People waved, cheered, and even cried. It wasn't just a flight, it was a celebration of hope, effort, and unity. When they landed, the applause didn't stop. The president walked over and gave them each a medal. He said, "You two have given our country wings. Thank you for showing us what belief can build." That evening, as the sun set, Salif and Issa sat near the runway, watching the sky slowly turn orange and pink. They didn't speak for a while. They just watched the clouds drift, feeling peaceful. Finally, Issa said, "Do you think we'll ever stop building?" Salif smiled. "No, because there's always another sky waiting." Their story didn't end with Faso Flyer 2. It continued, in classrooms, in workshops, in dreams. Across Burkina Faso and beyond, young minds began building their own futures. Because 2 boys once believed they could fly, and they proved that nothing is too far when your heart is strong and your dream is clear. And so, the land that once watched the birds with wonder had now built its own wings.